All right, my friends, welcome back to Build Science
201.
We're talking vapor control today, and our first topic is uniform load. You ready, Steve?
Born ready.
All right, guys, let's get going.
Build Science 201 is sponsored by Anderson Windows and Doors, Huber Engineered Woods, and Proseco.
Hi there, I'm Matt Reisinger, and today I want to share how zip system building enclosures are truly transforming the future and frankly the present day of construction. The zip system portfolio streamlines the installation of critical components like the weather-resistant barrier and air barrier. Plus with zip system R-sheathing, you get continuous installation for wall assemblies all in one efficient package. These products aren't just about ease of installation, however. They help builders meet vital performance goals. Think lower blower door scores and even Energy Star certification. Achieving higher efficiency has never been easier. What are one of the standout features of zip system, you might ask? The tape seams create a tight barrier against air leakage, resulting in a more energy efficient building enclosure. I gotta tell you, this is a game changer for the comfort of the homes that we build, and I absolutely love this feature about Zip is that it's not just waterproof, but it's naturally very airtight as well. Zip system has fundamentally changed the way homes are being built today, and the best part, these innovative products are available nationwide. Just ask your local lumberyard. And here's some exciting news. There's a rebate offer for Zip system products. Just use the link in the description to learn more. Let's build better together. Check out those rebates and make the smart choice with Zip System today. All right, Steve, where do we start? Ooh, that's a spooky image for number one.
Start at Halloween.
I took that picture, actually.
I know. That is an awesome picture.
So here's where I suggest we start, Steve. First off, we need to remember that as we think about vapor and vapor control, that it's different in different climates, right? And so the way that we control vapor is going to vary depending on where we're building a house. If we're building a house in Alaska, it's going to be different than building a house in Missouri, which is different than building a house in Texas. And this really came to head for me. I built houses for many years in the Washington, D.C. market. Then I moved to Portland, Oregon, which is a very different market than D.C. And then I moved to Texas in 2005. And my first fall, I was in Texas. I said to my wife, hey, let's carve a pumpkin. It's October. It was first part of October, and she said, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, come on, that'll be fun. So we carved this pumpkin, and it wasn't 3 or 4 days later that I took this picture like, oh my gosh, where am I? This is a whole different world. And in fact, it is. We're in the hot, humid climate zone here. And so as you look at the climate zone map of America, think about where you are, because that's going to make a difference in how you control vapor. And specifically, we're going to be talking about vapor barriers and vapor retarders. We think about a vapor barrier, I like to think about a Ziploc bag, right? If you put a sandwich in a Ziploc bag, it's going to get moldy after some period of time because it's not able to dry, and with the moisture in the bread and the jelly is going to turn to mold before too long. On the other hand, if you put that sandwich in just a paper bag and left it on your counter, it probably wouldn't mold up. It would certainly dry out and not be edible in a period of time, but it wouldn't necessarily get moldy. So we need to think about where we are in the country before we get started on this topic.
You know, I don't want to beat up on Twinkies, but in college, we actually put a Twinkie in a piece of Tupperware. We sprayed it with water weekly. It didn't grow mold for the whole year.
Are you serious?
So who's ever making Twinkies, they're either like really, really good for you.
Oh, Steve, you
or there's some questionable stuff.
Example right away. The Twinkie doesn't mold.
There you go. But you know, one of the things I like about this is we're talking about buildings here, but understand mold spores are all around us, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a pumpkin or you're a 2x4 stud. The mold spores are looking for three things. They're looking for water activity, they're looking for the right temperature, and they're looking for a food source.
That's right.
And the minute you provide the three of those, there you go.
Yeah, and I do want to point out too, Steve, that this video in order, I'm assuming you watched this series in order, water is our number one enemy for buildings, for longevity, for durability. We want to get water right. Then we want to get air right, and we spent a lot of time talking about air sealing because when air leaks in, it brings moisture with us. So really, this is the least important control layer of the ones that we've talked about first. If we get those other two right, we're not going to have to worry nearly as much about this. However, we will show you a couple examples of when you don't think about it and you don't pay attention that we can have some problems.
And I just want to touch on that because you bring up a really good point. I've never had a building inspector ask about our water management practices or our air management, but I have them ask, where's the vapor barrier?
100%.
And all of a sudden they get concerned about that, but they're not really concerned about the things that really matter.
100%.
So, not that this doesn't matter, but there's priorities to be set there.
That's right.
So there you have it. Let's start right at the ground level.
Yep.
Right? These are our good friends at Stego. This is a vapor barrier.
Mm-hmm.
It means basically it's impermeable. Moisture is not migrating through this.
Mm-hmm.
You can see all of the joints are taped. This one hasn't been taped yet, but it will look like those.
Yep.
So job well done.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's stopping that ground moisture from adding the moisture load to our house and finding a surface that it could condense on inside the house. So that barrier at the base where our house meets the dirt, basically the soil, that's an important place in the house to actually have a barrier system.
This is another house. This is a perfect block foundation system where we used a 10 mil poly.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I want to highlight here is notice we have it all around here,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have it there.
That's interesting. Why is it missing in that location, Steve?
So that is a ground coupled cold storage.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So they grow their own food. We're going to put it in there. So we're actually going to seal up the walls and seal up the ceiling so that this space is coupled with the ground.
So it could be a little more humid in there, frankly.
Yeah. Right.
Fascinating.
Be a little more humid, could be a little chillier.
Almost like a root cellar.
It's basically a root cellar.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
You know, this one's just highlighting the details, like the other one, you know, sealing up around it, all these penetrations. Notice here, it goes down into the bucket. So getting those details right.
Here's one of mine, Steve. We don't do in-ground foundations. We don't have typically basements here, but we do some crawl spaces occasionally. And so this is a crawl space foundation that I built a couple years ago where we've got Stego as well as the vapor barrier. So whether it's an in-ground foundation or a crawl space, we want to make sure that we're stopping that vapor drive from the soil into the house.
Yeah, job well done. And I like, you know, the detail of bringing this up, sealing it around the piers.
Yep.
You know, those are the critical areas. Getting this right, that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Getting this right, that's where the challenge is.
And I do want to point out it hasn't been taped to the foundation yet, so we will still be taping the foundation after this photo is taken. And then I believe on this house we use some close-cell spray foam on the foundation walls and over top of that. And the rebar that's in there, not the rebar, the mesh that's in there, we're going to be pouring what we call a rat slab down in there, a non-structural short basement slab for a crawl space. It makes for a terrific conditioned crawl space. And there's no vents in this crawl space as well. This is going to be part of the conditioned space of the house.
Good job.
Steve, this is a Texas house. And what you're seeing there is what we call visqueen, which is basically a 6 mil poly, a plastic product. And in Texas, Steve, we don't want to use a vapor barrier on the inside of our houses. And this is a good example why. What you're seeing there is that probably on the outside of that house, the exterior cladding had gotten wet. Maybe there was even a little bit of air leakage into that space. He's drawn out the studs right there. There might have been stucco. There might have been siding on the outside of this house. And so as moisture got into that cavity, there was no way for that moisture to dry to the inside of the house. So in the hot, humid south, we don't want any barrier systems on the inside of our houses. Unfortunately, for quite a few years, inspectors in Texas were going with code, which code required a barrier, a plastic sheeting on the inside of the house. And so I've got several pictures of remodels of houses that are like this one that's only 20-some years old and had problems because of that barrier on the inside. We also in Texas need to remember we don't want to mastic mirrors to outside walls because we pull that off in a couple years and we'll find that there's some mold growth behind that mirror. We want to be cautious about anything that might stop drying towards the inside of the house because really 9, 10, 11 months of the year we're using air conditioning. and so we can dry to the inside of our houses. On the other hand, we can have either a permeable or an impermeable exterior, and we're going to get into that into a minute, but we've talked about that in previous episodes with some of the peel and sticks that I've used in the past.
You know, one of the things, and you've probably already heard me say it in this series, but I'm going to say it again. We can learn so much from taking buildings apart.
For sure.
Right? When I look at this photo, 3 things that I look at immediately. One, it's a uniform load, right? You could see it. The mold is everywhere. The last part of air management, we talked about escalation. Look what's happening here at the outlet, right? There's significantly more mold in this cavity than there is in the adjacent cavities, and it's due to that electrical box.
That's a great point.
Right?
Yep.
And then 3, I'll leave you with, this is how Joe would have drawn this out for me 25 years ago. He would have said, yeah, we have impermeable material there, impermeable material there. You know what we call this? You're going to love it. We call it a diaper, right? And what are diapers filled with? I'll leave it to your imagination.
Oh, that's hilarious. We don't want diapers in the job.
We don't want diapers in our house or in our walls.
Too funny. Here's another one, again, 20-year-old house, and you're seeing behind that plastic, there was condensation that formed, and because that moisture wasn't able to dry to the inside, and you don't normally think of fiberglass insulation as plastic as being something that mold would grow on, but even in the right conditions over time, that will grow on the backside of things like that.
It'll find dust particles and all this other stuff that gets blown in there, and then it'll feed on the organics in those dust particles. And
yep. So in the South, we don't want anything being a barrier on the inside of our assemblies.
You know, I'm just going to summarize really quick. If you're using poly on the inside of the wall, the first question that comes to mind is why? And you need to answer that question very, very intelligently, because there's probably nothing that is more dangerous than putting poly on the inside of a wall anywhere in the country.
Point. Yeah, it's a great point. Another one of ours, Steve, that we actually were able to see quite a bit of mold growth on the back of the sheetrock. This was like a 15-year-old house. And again, you're seeing that vapor barrier on that exterior wall. So just several photos to say, look, we just need to be really cautious about especially barriers and where we put those barriers. So on the inside can be really bad. On the outside in Texas, I can get away with that. I think I said this in earlier videos, go check those out. But up to climate zone 3A, we can put a barrier product on the outside. Above that, we want to have a permeable exterior in some way, shape, or form. And by permeable, usually we're saying something like 10 perms or more if you're looking at the manufacturer's data sheets.
Yeah. You know, and again, getting back to what can I learn from a photo? You know, when I look at this, I see the mold. The mold is all low in the wall, unlike the previous pictures that had some in the field. And then when I look at the drywall, I can see that it's down here at the bottom of the drywall is what I'm assuming there. And so what I deduce from this is that plate is probably sitting on a cooler slab. And so that right there is creating that right temperature for condensation. The moisture that's being held in this wall, even if it is up high, it can't dry out. So that moisture will just fall if it condenses. And it all collects down in that area and then creates your mold problem.
If I remember correctly, that's a north side of the house as well, which means it's not getting as much sun to dry out those walls.
Cooler.
So it's even cooler than other walls on a house.
There are solutions to it. Smart vapor retarders.
And there's a bunch of different brands out there, including, which we don't have a photo of it, but the old school craft paper that was used by manufacturers for years. Is an interesting product in that if you look at the data sheet, it'll say that it's, I don't know what the perm rating is. Let's call it 15 or 20 perms on there. But it's a variable, it's a throttle. When there's more moisture present, it tends to be more vapor open. And I think that's true with a lot of the manufacturer's membranes that are out there.
They call this a smart vapor retarder for that very reason. Right.
And again, we want to key on that word retarder, not barrier.
Yes.
Things that retard are good when it comes to vapor, especially when we're talking about the inside of the house. We want to be really cautious about those barriers. Let's talk about the north for a second, though, Steve. Why?
I'm just going to write it there.
That is a barrier.
That is a barrier.
That's right, for sure.
Right.
There's nothing getting through there. That's
Until you're clear.
that's your plastic sandwich bag, right? That nothing's going to get through. On the other hand, a material like this, if we were to make a sandwich bag out of it, let's say, and put a wet sponge, a damp kitchen sponge in there, and I came back after a couple days, that sponge would dry. There's some amount of drying that's going to happen through a material like this if there's a difference in the humidity or in the pressure, the vapor pressure, between the outside and the inside. So that membrane isn't smart in that it knows where to dry through or which direction,
right.
but it does give the ability to change moisture through that assembly without the movement of air.
Yeah. So I just drew this line through because I want to make a distinction. I see it all the time in social media when people talk about it. Air management versus vapor management, right? We put this up and then somebody's going to say, well, your house needs to breathe. It can.
Mm-hmm.
It can breathe. It can breathe moisture, right? Moisture can move through there. Now, if I go up and I put my lips on that and try and blow, I can't blow air through it. So Myrex is a really good air barrier, but as terms of a vapor barrier, it allows moisture to transfer. So if you don't fully understand it, you can go through, watch Build Science 101, kind of catch up with us here, but you have to understand there is a distinction between air management and vapor management.
That's right.
And the term, my house needs to breathe.
Yeah, the vapor is diffusing through that material.
Like we can put it on the inside, we can put it on the outside of a wall, right? If we're going to do outsolation on this wall, now this is probably climate zone, it's 5 or 6, this is up in Vancouver area, Passive House certified. But we have that air barrier on the outside here, but it is also vapor open. So very much like the Myrex, it's working in terms of air management for us, but in vapor management, this wall can pretty much flow through.
Yeah, and in those cold climates, we want to be able to move moisture through to the outside of the wall. And so one nice thing about using rock wool in particular is that's a vapor open insulation. And we want to be cautious that our whole assembly is vapor open to the outside when we're in a cold climate. So that's an assembly that's able to dry to the outside, especially in those cold winter months when we've got very low humidity outside. The cold air can't hold much moisture. And so if we had some moisture that was accumulating inside the wall cavity, it would be able to dry to that outside.
Right. And, one of the beauties of this system, which I absolutely love, it's certainly not the most inexpensive systems, but moisture can come out of here. It can dry through the insulation, but we also have a 3/4 inch channel here where we allow for water management in the rain screen, but more importantly, we can allow that to dry out too.
That's right.
So if that rock wool does have moisture come there, that moisture has a path.
Drainage and drying is happening there. I like it. Ooh, what are we seeing here, Steve?
This is roof gone wrong.
Oof, that looks real wrong.
That is real wrong. But again, understand that the attack, it's a uniform load. If I put a 6-sided box, it attacks all 6 sides. Now, it's somewhat related to temperature. The roofs, walls, could potentially have more, or you saw in the other photo is actually the opposite. When you get that cold bottom plate, we have a problem. But this just, this was a very poorly vented roof system. And you can see here where we have blocks, the problem got worse.
So this was a vented roof that had blockage and probably some insulation that also was stopping airflow from coming through there. And so that moisture that was happening in a cold climate wasn't able to dry properly with that ventilation channel that should have been on top of the insulation.
You can see the ventilation channel here, right? Like I can draw this.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Gotcha. Fascinating. You can really see it, can't you? So, Steve, in other words, where there was ventilation, where that trough on the cavity is, that's where that accumulation of moisture happened, right?
Yeah, because we have a lot more air there. We're moving a lot more air, moving a lot more moisture. The moisture gets in there. It's not vented at the top. there's no place for that moisture to go. So we're basically filling up those vents with moisture.
Wow.
So this is a little bit of a hard picture to see, but what we have here is this line here is the roof sheathing to the SIPS panel. This is a SIPS panel behind here. And the thing I was concerned about a SIPS panel, when you move into these, I'll call them exotic. They're not real exotic, but they're different than your standard rafter, cut, or truss roof. I was concerned about the moisture that migrates up through the SIPS roof. If you follow building science, Joe has some just horrible photos of SIPS failure. So what we did there was we put in furring strips, but we created an 1.5 inch vented roof. So we just vented on top of the SIPS.
It's great.
How do we deal with moisture in a building? Where do we put it? These are kind of, I'd call them a conglomerate photo. So what you're looking at here is, this is our air barrier at the top of the roof, and we created a manufactured attic in there. We built that into the trusses because we want a fully ducted, distributed ERV system in this house.
Got it.
Right, so we had to make room for that. This is a slab-on-grade house. It's the first passive house in America under the prescriptive method.
Oh, wow, neat.
Yeah, so we just completed this probably about 6 months ago. But in terms of vapor management, it is, if I seal up the box and my house needs to breathe from a vapor standpoint, then this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. This is the house breathing, right?
That's your fresh air system for the house.
Fresh air system for the house.
And lastly, we'll end with this slide, Steve. This is actually what's commonly referred to as a vapor diffusion port. We're getting a little nerdy here. This may be closer to 301 than 201. But there's a great paper that Joe Stiebrick has written at buildingscience.com called Ping Pong Water. And the point of the article is basically, if we're going to use open cell spray foam inside our attic to make a conditioned attic space, especially in the hot and humid south, there is a concern that over time moisture can accumulate at the ridge of the house. And I don't want to get into all the science on that. But basically what we've done on this house is we've added a vapor open material at the ridge. So that Delta Fox that you're seeing there is something like 100 perms or 75 perms, whereas the shark skin underlayment is very low perm, and I actually don't know the perm rating off the top of my head, but it's not 0, but it's pretty close.
Right.
And so what we've done is we've added a permeable membrane at the ridge, and what you can't see before this photo that was done is we added some, basically some slits on the roof so that that zip system sheathing, which you kind of see poking through there, wouldn't stop the vapor at the ridge, and it would allow that vapor to dry through that diffusion port. And then you can see the carpenter from this drone shot adding some 1x4 lath so that the metal roof that went on here would have a ventilation space, a ridge vent and a soffit vent, so that any moisture that got into that space would be able to dry out. And so in the south, dehumidifiers are something I use in my houses all the time, including my personal house. I have 2 at my house. And so we're keeping that humidity low. But the vapor diffusion port allows any humidity that accumulates at that sheathing at the ridge to be able to dry through that vapor diffusion port.
Yeah, and it's using the drive through these vent strips to take that moisture and eject it from the system. The thing I like about the vapor diffusion port, I know you said you use a lot of dehumidification, is this is working 24/7 for me.
That's right.
This valve never shuts off. It is on all the time. Dehumidifiers, people go on vacation, lose power, kid unplugs it to plug something else in the attic or basement, whatever the case is. It might not be working all the time. This is working all the time.
And the last thing I want to point out, I don't have a photo of it currently here, but that Delta Fox was taped. Actually, you can kind of see it at the 1x4 is nailed down already, but it was taped to the other underlayment. So this is an airtight but vapor open cap. Kind of like a cap on the top of my head. You know, if I wore a plastic hat, it would be, even on a cold day, it would be very hot. I wouldn't be able to take that sweat on my head and dry through it. Whereas this hat has some great ventilation. This is a vapor open build show hat, right? And it makes me comfortable even on a hot Texas day because I could dry my sweat through my hat. That's kind of the same analogy on that vapor diffusion port.
The thing I love about building is like we can relate it to a baseball hat or anything, right? Mother Nature has her set of rules. Our job is to understand those rules and design and build appropriately.
100%. All right, Steve, what's up next here on vapor?
Perspective.
Ooh, I
How
like
we
it.
look at it.
All right, guys, stay tuned. We'll see you next time on The Build Show.
Sponsored by Anderson Windows and Doors, Huber Engineered Woods, and Proseco. This is Build Science 201.